I knew about Russ probably when he first came with the Imperials. And I had seen him at the Christian Booksellers Association at a distance. I'd never met him. I thought this is quite a charismatic young character. I've been around a long time now, so I usually notice good talent coming down the road, and I thought, this is quite a character. It'd be nice to know him. And then life went on, and we were working in our circles, he was working in his circles, and somewhere we finally connected on a one-to-one, and liked it. People always ask, how do you get into this field? Mainly it's through networking, it's getting to know people. And many times it's getting to know people in another setting other than music. So for whatever reason, then he told me that as a kid, he used to come to the Barton Coliseum in Little Rock and see the Bill Gaither Trio. Gloria and I had just got married. She's a pretty young thing. He said he had a crush on Gloria. and he said, I remember those days. I remember her doing those quote unquote readings that she did. And it was just very moving to him. I knew nothing about his story, knew nothing about his growing up in the church, his dad being a preacher. But we started talking about stuff like that. And then the vocal band got started somewhere in the 80s after the trio had laid it down. And we got closer and closer, and then we went out one weekend, and Michael English was singing with us at that time with the vocal band and couldn't make it. And so I called Russ and I said, Russ, would you even consider this? He said, I'd love to do it. And so he came out. We had Mark and probably Terry Franklin and myself. We were in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and he was smashing. He was, people loved him, and that Pentecostal character that he had in his voice was quite new to the Christian music scene. People loved it. And plus, when I got to know him, he also grew up in the same kind of music that I grew up in, the Southern gospel music. And he loved the Old Statesman Quartet with Hovey Lister and all the excitement of those days. And so we got talking about all of that. And so my mind's a little bit foggy here, but it seemed like that was the first time that we really kind of drew a little closer together. That would have been the mid-'80s going into the '90s, and when I did, not the first video, but the second video, I asked him if he'd be available just to give a little testimonial about what these guys meant to them, the Statesmen and the Blackwood Brothers. So we did some interviews on the stage at the Ryman, and got to know him a little bit better then. He was so kind about how these people had impacted his life. And it was a warm, good, personal relationship at that time. And then I don't know when what the time frame was, but I can remember when Tori called me and said, Bill, I need your help. And I said, help on what? I may have heard the word intervention before, but it was really the first time that I had been involved in one, didn't really know what that all involved. And when I showed up that night with about 12 or 14 other people, it was very uncomfortable for me, to be honest with you, because I'm not sure that I knew Russ that well, but I knew him well enough to know that I loved him. I mean, to know Russ is to love him. And so I asked Tori, what are we supposed to do? I said, just be there as his friend. Of course, his counselor took over. And I'll never forget looking at him that day in a room of 14, 15, 16 people. and thinking, this is a little bit cruel. You know, if I'm a friend, why am I here in a confrontational situation this early into our relationship? And I'll never forget, after the meeting was over, he left. And so I went out looking for him and said, "You okay?" "Yeah, I'm okay." He said, you want to get something to eat?" "Yeah." And I think maybe at that time it was a time when whatever our relationship was up until then, I think it deepened pretty much that night. I found myself apologizing to him. He said, "Don't apologize." He said, "You know, I'm the problem, and this is necessary. What are you going to do?" "Well, I'm going to do what they tell me to do, you know, because I need help." So that was the first of some pretty in-depth stuff. So that would have been, I don't know, the last part of the 80s, maybe the beginning of the 90s.
How did you know about his alcoholism?
That's the first time I knew about it. I'd never seen any evidence of it. All I knew was this fun, loving, sweet guy. And I don't think he was trying to hide it. From what I understood later on when I got to know him, he basically was by himself most of the time. First of all, Tori Taff is one of the brightest people that Gloria and I know. We always gravitate to folks who like to read books and like to think, and so Gloria loved Tori right away because of her reading and thinking background. And then when we got to know what a loving, kind person that she was, you know, we sing a lot about Amazing Grace, but when you see it, when you see grace really happening in people's life, we understand Amazing Grace from a God. But the other part of Amazing Grace is how we extend grace to others. I don't think I know of anybody in our field who has been such an extender of grace than Tori. You know, I've been in the music field for 50 years now of my life. And my biggest role probably has been that of a producer, a little bit of a slice manager. I started out as a public school teacher. I feel like I'm a coach. I love sports. And the hardest line to find is how far does friendship go and how far does grace go to the point that you have to say, this is not working out well for you or for me at this point. And I'm becoming, and the psychologists call this, an enabler. That's the toughest line to find, because as a Christian, you're trying to do your best to say, hey, we are all part of the human race. We are all flawed, and we're just flawed in different ways. But also when you're put into an ecclesiastical situation where you have to make decisions, and where even I'm sure this would be true as a wife of an alcoholic, to simply say, Russ, when am I becoming an enabler here? Because what I really want to do is help you get beyond this. But at this point, we got to make some decisions, and some hard decisions. Tori is probably one of the best examples of that I know of. I mean, she's just been amazing. She's an amazing wife, and the perfect lover, I think, for Russ. Has been through the hard times with him, but also there's a toughness to that gal. Not in any kind of bad sense, but in when I use tough with Tori, I mean strength. I think that would be part of the virtuous woman that the Old Testament talks about. And She has those qualities. I think the world got to know Russ through contemporary Christian music. And at that point, for the traditional Southern gospel people, he would have been, quote unquote, rock and roll. And they were into the harmony business. Okay, they were not into the rhythm stuff as much as Russ was. But just as Elvis was, he was influenced very, very much in his early days by any biographer who has done anything on Elvis. He was influenced by country and by rhythm and blues and gospel, both black and white gospel. And in the early days, the big chief of the Statesman Quartet down in Tupelo would let him in the back door at the old Tupelo City Auditorium. And he went in there as a 13, 14-year-old sitting on the front row watching this gospel quartet do their thing. And when Russ told me he did the same thing, I think in Fresno, California, when the Statesman came to town, and it's the first time he'd ever seen a cordless microphone. And Hovey Lister and the Statesman were singing an old song written by Dorothy Love Coates called Getaway Jordan. And they were encoring the last verse about 3 or 4 or 5 different times. And the last time they were encoring it, Hovey was down in the middle of the crowd with this cordless mic singing that verse, "Getaway Jordan, I want to cross over to see my Lord." Hovey said, "Man, I thought," or Russ said, "Man, I thought that was unbelievable, you know." So yes, we were having a wonderful time going through my collection of stuff. And he was asking me questions, said, "And you knew these guys?" I said, "Well, I've got to know them pretty well." He said, "Man, I thought if I could ever do that." So we are all here because we have been moved and influenced by people who do what we do, probably at a higher level. You know, Gloria and I grew up as writers. And really, when we still look at Stuart Hamlin's lyrics, "This old house, it is no secret." Until then, we think we'll never get to that level, you know. So I think it's always great that we have something to reach to. My role with any of these young artists is always a little bit difficult for me to talk about. I spent the first 10 years of our marriage, Gloria and I, as teachers in the public school. And I think once a teacher, always a teacher. And sometimes I stick my nose into stuff I shouldn't stick my nose, but I care. You know, I see a young talent and I say, you know, you're doing this well, you're doing this well. You probably ought to look at this a little bit. I don't think that's in your best interest. I'll never be known as a great singer. I don't even think I'm a great melody writer as far as songs are concerned. But I take a little bit of pride in my role as a producer and as a coach, and I just enjoy spending time, you know, imparting anything that we have learned through our life, and sometimes through our own mistakes. In fact, one of the places that we got to know Russ and Tori quite well was through a series of artist retreats that we used to have at Lake Barkley in Kentucky. A lot of the young artists would come in, and I guess we were the sponsors. We were the mom and dads. Now we're the grandmas and grandpas. We're probably the great grandmas and grandpas at this stage. But to simply say to these kids, you're not the first person who's gone through these struggles. You know, we're talking about Russ's particular struggle. I think one of the hardest things for any artist, Russ or the Gaithers or any major artist today, is this is going to happen in your career. It's going to level off somewhere, and then somewhere this is going to start happening. We don't like this. This is not fun. And but it's part of life because there's somebody else coming along. Just like it is in basketball, somebody can jump higher, somebody can do a slam dunk better, somebody can throw the football farther. You know, records are made to be broken. And I think as Christians, we like to say we're above all of that. I don't think we are. We're human beings, you know, and we want to do what we do as well as we can do it. But I think to adjust to that is a very important part of Christian maturity, whether we're in the Christian artist field or not. And I think many times as artists, we tend to think that we're the only voice out there, and we're the only voice really holding up the true standard, whether it's artistically or from the standpoint of the message. We can over-spiritualize what we do pretty quickly. And when we do that, I think the devil says, I got you. I never met Russ's dad. I've only heard what Russ and Tori both have said. And I think Russ on a given day would say he did the best that he knew. And I've often said that to my own kids. You know, I said, this is the first time I've been a dad. I'm doing the best I know how to do. But in Russ's situation, it evidently was not enough. And there was some double life going on there that really disturbed him, that he had to work through some deep stuff in his past. And I ached for him when he was doing that.